G'day, Daniel.
Graham, how are you?
Very well indeed, sir. Welcome back for interview number 3. For those that have been watching this series, we covered, as you know, in the first discussion that we had, you and I, we talked about the leading team's high-performance framework and high-performing leaders. In the second interview, you and I covered in some detail the leading team's model, your high-performance model. We talked about the fact that, sports teams and teams in general, business teams, sales teams, they all have to be effective, they have to have a common purpose. That common purpose then leads to a certain agreed behavioural framework. Out of that spills, KPIs and metrics that drive the right behaviours and the right relationship, and the ability to speak honestly and openly with people, which I think often is missing in sales teams. I'll come to that later. And then, today I think I'd like to explore with you, if we can, a little bit more about the pyramid model that you and I have talked about previously, and see if we can flesh that out a little bit as it pertains to both sport and business and sales.
Definitely, mate. I think as you go through that review, it reminds me some of the feedback we've been getting, which has been really appreciated. So thank you to those who are watching and jumping on LinkedIn and sharing some views. It clearly resonates with a lot of people. There's some frustration there. There's some, no joke, guys. And there's some wow moments. There's also this almost this defeated attitude from a lot that, sorry, it's sales and we're always going to be metric based. And I'll continue to challenge that. And I understand the challenge there, but I can say one thing I didn't share, and it's just come to mind because we come to the end of the financial year again. And ordinarily for leading teams, that's the time where we would sit down with our head office staff who don't get to that, they're not part of the sales. So we're at leading teams, we're facilitators. We also got to find our own work, and we're incentivized accordingly. And staff we are same. The head office staff don't fall under that. So how do they get rewarded? Well, we have historically over the journey done it in many ways. Long before my time at leading teams, but it's folklore now. Is one year we put a bundle of cash on the table and said, work it out for yourselves. Now that wasn't the biggest, strongest one, grabbed hold of it and ran. It was a facilitated conversation, and we've done this previously, post that in a little bit more refined manner. We've got a set of behaviours. We've got a trademark at leading teams, clearly. That's what we preach. We're going to divide this money up, not evenly necessarily. We're going to divide it up based on who we think has lived the behaviours the best for the year. There is absolutely nothing stopping salespeople, sales teams, any team saying at the end of the year, if there's a bonus to be given, it's going to be behavioural based. Why? Because we value that agreed framework that we talked about in the last year. We value it so strongly. We know that it works. We know that it'll help us help our bottom line, that we want to reward that behaviour. Because we can, and we're big on encouraging clients, encouraging leaders to give feedback and say, well done. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when you're actually putting your hand out and handing them a reward for it, a financial reward, then clearly that's saying that that's the ultimate way of saying, especially in a sales environment, that's the ultimate way of saying, well done, we value your behaviour. Yep. You're also publicly making it clear that, no, we are going to reward that behaviour. That's the behaviour we want. If you want to get rewarded at the end of the year, behave like that, rather than traditionally, as we've said in probably episode 1, traditionally the person who gets remunerated the most is the one who might be the most toxic in the building, but has gone away and got the most sales.
Yep. And that's in my career, that's always been the way. I don't think I've ever been in a sales team where, behaviours have been rewarded, and certainly never been in a situation in a sales team where there's been an agreed behavioural framework even in place. Yeah. So that's a big step forward. I think even in my business, Daniel, since our first discussion, I keep going back to my team now and saying, our common purpose, we've got that fleshed out now. I keep saying, does this activity that we're doing right now help with our common purpose or not? And it's helped us stack rank or rank order our priorities a lot, I have to say.
And through COVID, organisations, we say all this stuff gets tested most under pressure. So through COVID, organisations with a clearly defined purpose, it just makes them so much. I'm not saying it's been easy to navigate through COVID, but Graham, the way you just explained it is exactly why we think you need a purpose. A lot of organisations will do it because they've seen every other organisation have a really nice sign on the wall, and they think we better get ourselves one of those. Yep. But when I ask those people, it's like, I'm not really clear what it is. But that's really pleasing to hear. That's good. At least we've made an impact on you anyway.
Oh, you've made an big impact on all of our listeners too, I think, mate. This model is, it's like, was it Da Vinci that said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication? It's a relatively simple model when you look at it on paper.
Yeah, I would have said last time. I haven't resplit the atom in what we've shared. Unfortunately, it's straightforward. The simple bit is the fact is it's not simple in its application, because it takes hard work, it takes persistence. There's going to be roadblocks, there's going to be blockers, etc. How do we go? So we're speaking of it. Why don't we just throw it back up just as a quick reminder?
Please. Yep, good idea.
If I. And that was what we talked about last time. We clearly focused on that culture piece. We said culture was the way we do things. We talked about the keys to culture being that strong professional relationships, being the trust and respect piece. And then having you've talked about it, that framework agreed by the organisation, by the people, or as many people involved as we can. For the maximum buy-in, the idea is there. And then we call them, and we talked about the reason we call them genuine conversations, rather than tough, rather than courageous, rather than hard. We call them genuine because they are authentic two-way, and we also don't want to scare people off. Graham, we were talking before this. Go on.
I was just going to say, and you're probably going there as well, but the thing that really jumped out for me in our previous discussion, interview 2, this concept of the genuine conversations, that getting to the heart of the matter and being open and honest and being able to have your say in a situation in business where quite often you haven't been able to speak directly or speak your mind. You've just been told, salesperson, you do this, you're a coin operated robot, off you go, and rarely do these people get an opportunity to have a voice and to speak up and say their piece.
And we think Paul Roos is a great advocate of ours at leading teams. He was a Sydney Swans coach. He played 350 odd AFL, VFL games, a legend of the game. Now, in his words, in all that time, he never ever got asked his opinion as a player, what he thought of game plan training. So we think, if you've ever heard him speak in the media, you hear he's a smart fellow, he might have had something to offer back then as a player. We think all 40 players had something to offer. Why? Because they're the ones doing it. So this is spot on, and I've written about this in my book and posts and whatnot, where I think we've forgotten that the salesperson in a business context is the conduit between the market and the organisation. They are out there in the field. They are the foot soldiers at the coalface, gathering market intelligence and theoretically bringing that market intel back into the business. And yet quite often their opinions are not really valued, and they're not even asked by the senior managers about their opinions on things, which is crazy. Well, it's old school. It's traditional. You'll get a certain level from them. Will you get buy-in? Will you get discretionary effort? Will you get to find out what's going on out there? I mean, it's the Steve Jobs quote, isn't it? Apple, and I don't think I shared with this one last time. Maybe I did. Don't understand why organisations hire smart people, then tell them what to do.
Yeah.
At Apple, we hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. Now, understand that there is a certain level of anxiety that brings to certain leaders when that's mentioned, because they're worried about loss of power or authority.
Yep.
So let's be clear. The model that I'm advocating here is an empowerment model.
Yes.
It's not. So there's been plenty of authoritarian leaders throughout history, and there'll be plenty more going forward. I'm not going to argue the wheres and wherefores of which one's better or not. All I know is I'm a big advocate of this one. I've seen it work. I'm a big believer in it, and I think this one has greater sustainability to it.
Well, you know about it much better than I do, mate, in the sporting fields. But that old command and control type coach is now being replaced by the sort of coach that can create willing followers. And willing followers, in my simple way of thinking, require that empowerment that you're talking about, to have a voice, to be able to have your say when you think it's appropriate. And in sales, that's always missing, I think.
But we need to be clear, because there'll be some leaders sitting there saying, oh, great, so the tail wags the dog, or the lunatics run the asylum. This is not a leader is still a leader, and a leader at times will have to make strong decisions. This is not a soft option. All we're saying, see, the problem with the word empowerment, I can't, Graham, you can't tell people in your team that you're empowering them. Empowering is a feeling they have to get. Right. And they have to get it through your behavior and your actions, that they feel like you actually value their input. You want them to grow. You can't, it's like when leaders say, I've got an open door policy, please come and see me. Now, that might be what they say, but for some people outside, that door looks bolted shut.
Yep.
And what will that come back to? It's on the screen. The
Yes.
relationship, the trust and respect we have amongst each other. And that's the piece I guess we'd like to focus on today.
Yep.
I'm not sure how much detail I went into, to be honest, last time. I do know that when I push and challenge teams around spending more time on relationships, will you tell me, what do you reckon the pushback is when I challenged teams, sales teams, any teams around spending more time on relationships? What do you reckon the pushback?
They'll say things like, that's fluffy stuff, and that doesn't get us over the line. That doesn't hit the KPIs or the metrics that we're after. It's pushed back as sort of secondary most of the time.
Absolutely. So even as they start to understand, that makes a bit of sense. Their answer will generally be any of what you've said, or we don't have time.
Right.
And what they're really saying when they say don't have time is effectively what you've just said. And we say that they're saying it's not a priority.
Right.
And I often throw that line up to groups, and I did once, and it was 3 or 4 years ago, and a fella in the group said he'd heard someone challenge him similarly recently, and the fella, and he'd been challenged. Next time he goes, use the term "don't have time" or "too busy." Change it to "it's not a priority."
That's right. Yeah, I love that.
The fella went on with his story though. It got even better. He's a young dad. He went home that night, and his 8-year-old son said, "Dad, can you read me a story?" And of course, this fella in his head was about to say, "I don't have time," but because he'd just been asked to. So luckily, in his head, he changed it to only in his head, so it's not a priority. And of course, what did he do? He read the story.
Yeah.
And any time I share that story with parents, it's sort of a bit of an aha moment because they get it. Our challenge, my challenge, your challenge, people who care about this stuff challenge is to get people to understand the value. And you just talked before about some of the pushbacks we get, that it isn't just HR fluff, that if we build that trust and respect, we have a greater level of dialogue, which is a genuine conversation below it, and we get better outcomes as a result.
Yeah, and listen, the proof points are everywhere that I look in my world, certainly in the sales world. So case in point, the average tenure for a B2B salesperson these days is about 16.8 months. The revolving door of salespeople inside most businesses is unbelievably dumb. And a lot of it stems from exactly what you're saying here. They don't feel empowered. They don't feel, there's no buy-in. They don't really feel part of the culture. They feel like they're just a tiny cog in the wheel. They're often told, by an autocrat, they're often told, you just do this, how many calls we made, how many meetings have you got? That's how we've always been successful. Don't you rock the boat, just get on with it. And
be clear, 100%. But be clear, because again, I can just almost picture some listeners out there saying, so they can just do what they want. This is not supposed to replace high levels of accountability. No, in fact, we say when you've got high level leaders, and we call them hard ass leaders, there are high levels of accountability, high levels of expectation. But it's based on an environment where people want to do it. They want to succeed. They're rewarded for that behavior. This is about high levels of accountability, but we say it's easy to do it if we have that trust and respect. So you're absolutely right. That's the experience we have. Now, we then ask people, how much is it going to cost you to keep replacing those people? And they seem to be happy enough to pay X amount a year in recruiting and all that. We say, why don't you consider preventing it? Why don't you start on this side of the, you've got your mechanics and dynamics there. Why don't you start on this side and get a culture where people, you won't win them all. Still, I had a client yesterday, in fact, really frustrated because they do bend over backwards for their people. And he's felt like he's been taken advantage of and he said, he was almost frustrated. Bugger this, I'm going to go. I said, are you really going to go back to the other way? Do you really want to be that leader? What about the other 90% in your business that are thriving because of the way you're being? Yeah, good point. But you'll still, this will hurt you at times. But doing this means you'll get close relationships. When people leave, that'll hurt more. Leading teams, when we have people leave, it hurts because we build connection. But your other alternative is a cold, sterile environment where you just churn them out.
Yeah. And listen, when you look at the world we now live in, the business world, high velocity, shortening sales cycles, everything's speeding up, right? And we're all inclined now to sort of make snap judgments on people. I see it all the time in the sales world where a sales leader will hire somebody and, they've only got to hear one person's opinion about, Daniel Healy's no good. He didn't do this or he didn't do that. And next thing they're on a PIP and they're being managed out within the first 6 months, or they're being fired before the probationary period finishes. And I keep saying, well, hang on. You went through the process. You interviewed and employed this person. It's now, the onus is now on you to make sure that person is given the support they need and the development that they need to be successful. Don't just make a snap decision and say, right, get him out, get another one in.
Yeah. And I reckon the fundamental question that we certainly encourage our teams and leaders, and we do it at Leading Teams, to ask in the early stages of someone's employment, the fundamental question is, how are we going as your leaders? What can we be doing to helping you succeed? Now, I reckon that's a question that gets missed a lot. It's, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing it? Remember what I said in day one, signs of great leadership are in the behavior of the followers. Unfortunately, if your new staff are failing, it's a reflection on you and your team. And that's bloody hard to take, but that's just a reality.
Mate, do you know how many times in a 30-year career I've had a boss come in and ask me that question? What more could I be doing to help you?
Not many.
I reckon once, maybe twice, if I'm lucky.
Because that's the other piece, just before we get to the pyramid that we talk about with this relationship bit, is it's the ability to be vulnerable. And for me, there's a couple of ways of being vulnerable. The first one is, certainly as a leader, but any team member, the ability to open up and say, I'm not perfect and I stuffed up. So the reason leaders don't ask that question is because they don't necessarily want to know. They don't want to open themselves up that maybe it's on them. Yeah. So there was a great, again, if you're into footy, there's a great documentary a while back. It was into the Collingwood Footy Club, and it was from a couple of years ago where they lost the grand final. And there was some vision in the room after the game, and the players were distraught. The coach, Nathan Buckley, was also distraught. He was in tears, and his comment at the time to the group, just an off-the-cuff comment, was, I don't know how to lead you guys right now. Now, it doesn't get much more vulnerable than that. Now, I don't think many of those players grabbed their bags, got out of there, rang their manager and said, we need to get out of here because Bucks doesn't know what he's doing. No, on the contrary, of course, they thought, wow, he's in there with us. There's some vulnerability in that.
Yeah.
And the other vulnerability is to be able to share of yourself. I've got one leader that I work with who has not had the traction he's ever had until one day when he shared of some personal mental health issues that he's been having. Now, all that did was create a revolving door in his office for people to come in saying, thank you, this is my story. He was more approachable, all that stuff. But it takes vulnerability.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the leaders you're talking about, they weren't prepared to do that. We think it's a huge part of being a great leader and creating a successful team.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. That vulnerability plays an important part too in the buyer-seller relationship. You know, when you can show to your buyer that you might have made a mistake, or you might have overspec'd something, or you might have done, just being honest and vulnerable can play enormous benefits in building that bond that you have with a really great customer.
I think for me, in my experiences with anything, be it going through a takeaway, drive through at a fast food joint, to anything, my loyalty will go to the people that have said, yeah, we stuffed that one up, or rather than either try and cover it up, then I'll be back. I agree. In fact, I think you can always turn a mistake into an absolute huge
positive
benefit upside for you. It's the way you handle that. Yeah, definitely.
I agree.
So let's jump into this pyramid. Again, understanding, we've talked about the fact that with these relationships comes trust and respect, and it makes it easier for us to have those conversations we talked about last time, which we call those genuine conversations. So this is a tool to measure your relationships. I'll talk through it. You can ask me questions as you go. You can see they're very scientific terms, so I hope people can bear with us on them. That's my attempt at sarcasm if you haven't worked it out. So at the most superficial, basic level in our relationship, we would call what we'd call grunt and nod. So in a big business, you might walk past someone in a hallway and that's all you give. I guess the example I use is me putting out the bins on a Tuesday night. I look down the road and there's someone 3 doors down doing it at the same time. They've been doing it for the last few years, and it's just a wave. It's a grunt or a nod. Sadly, some people, when I tell this, relate to their teenage children as part of that. Some often talk about their partners as well at times, but we won't go into that. So we get it. There's not much going on. It's grunt and nod.
Yep.
We move past that now, and we've got what we call stuff and things. So you'll notice on the side there's the word safe there. So it's very safe. It's very superficial. Stuff and things, some really basic topics, if we were talking about stuff and things, would be generally weather and again, sport, if you're into sport, would be the two. When I ask groups, absolutely. It might be Married at First Sight. It might be something on telly. It might be whatever the latest episode of something you're watching on Netflix.
Yep.
But I know when I used to go to Darwin to work, and I'd get in on that midnight flight and I'd walk out and get smashed by that humidity, and I'd wake up in the morning and walk to the session I was running and generally get wet from a storm. So I'd walk in and find some locals and I'd go, wow, what about this humidity? Yeah. And then I'd find a couple of Crows or Port supporters, because there's usually some expat South Australians up there, and we'd start talking footy, and I was away. But that, you could see, that's how and again, any of your sales folk who are listening, they'll connect this piece. They'll probably connect it more to their clients than they will to to their fellow staff often. We moved down. We're still in the safe region, but we're now talking about others or third person. If I go back to that example in Darwin, again, Adelaide's a pretty small place. So within a few minutes up there, I'm asking them where they went to school, where they grew up, and probably within 5 minutes, I found a third party connection that we can link up to.
Yep.
Sadly, others will recognise the other third person from a work perspective as being can be also that bitching and gossiping.
Right.
Would never happen in SalesTribe at your place, but I'm sure that you've heard of other places where a bit of that goes on.
Yep.
So we get that. We're working down, but we're still safe. We haven't got there's not a lot of risk involved in any of that.
Right.
The challenge we put to people where we think the magic happens is when people feel safe enough to get to the riskier section.
Yep.
And the first part of that is the ability to, I talked about it before, be vulnerable and share of ourselves.
Yep.
I'm struggling at work at the moment. This is what's happening to me at home. Those sort of conversations. And again, I gave an example where a leader was able to do that, lead by example, and it opened the door to a raft of stronger connections between him and his team. But there is a risk involved. It's plenty of people say, oh, work's work and home's home, and we don't mix the two up and all of that. So there's all those conversations we can have as we go.
Yep.
But we think that's an imperative part to get to the pointy end of the pyramid, which we call the feelings or the genuine conversations piece.
Yep.
And that's, again, where I said it before, that's where the special stuff happens. That's the ability for me to say, Graham, you told me you were going to email me yesterday with that document. You didn't. As a result, I missed the deadline and I'm really pissed off. Excuse my language.
Yes.
That's the conversation piece that's going to help us get better.
It's really fascinating for me to look at this, and once again, it's a wonderful and simple model, and as you say, the terms that everyone can get their head around. But I can't help thinking, being the long-term sales guy, that that's the sales funnel, right? And as you're putting leads in the top and you're taking these relationships down, these customer relationships as a salesperson, you're taking them down the funnel to the point where they close and they become a customer. You could almost say that the point of sale is that line there between safe and risk, right? Someone's ready to become a customer.
Good. That's a great analogy.
And they're ready to become a customer, and now all of a sudden you've got to start to play some risk. You've won the deal. Now it's time to deliver, and in order to deliver and take that buyer on a long-term journey, which they now expect, then you better be prepared to have some pretty frank and honest conversations, genuine conversations. So I think that's although it's a high performance model, I think it applies beautifully to the
it's a great way of looking at it. But again, it's the outward facing for the salespeople that are listening in, but also the internal. Am I able to go to the CEO and suggest we do something differently? And as the CEO of the sales, do my people really tell me what's going on?
Yeah.
But the sales funnel is a really good example. And of course, if we can, at leading teams, when we get a call from a client, I had a colleague the other day had someone ring him offline and suggest he's got some really mental health. Thank you for noticing that he was a bit off in a session, got some really challenging mental health issues. Now, my client obviously very shattered to hear that, but gets off the, I'm in a position with my clients where I'm trusted. I'm down there. That's got to be good for us.
Well, and to your point before about vulnerability, right? That is risk. So you are clearly down the bottom, and when you can have those genuine conversations with a buyer where things have gone wrong, as you said, that example of you've mucked up and you've admitted it and you've come clean and you're now desperately trying to make sure you make amends, then those genuine conversations are not just risky, but that's what leads to, that really long-term, happy, satisfied relationship.
Well, and anyone who's listening will be able to reflect right now the amount of genuine conversations needed through COVID. Either you got them ringing their clients, or the clients have any clients who felt safe enough to ring up and say, "Gee, I'm sorry, but we ain't got the money right now." Yeah. All of those, they're the conversations. Oh, gee, we've had a couple of them. Gee, I'm going to have a genuine conversation with you. Yep, okay, let me know. Or has it been an avoidance of phone calls? Has it been email? Has it been, gee, why aren't they responding to me? That'll be a great measure for the listeners, for the viewers right now, as to where people are on their pyramid. It's under pressure. It's a great test. So what we would do with a model like this is get people to think about and plot with their team. And I always give a couple of examples of a couple of stories. So I will now. I used to be involved in footy, as I've told you, and we had a coach once who I got on really well with. And on the surface, if you asked me, I would have said we're great mates. We love to punt together. We love to drink together. We'd love to have a bit of a joke. But if I laid our relationship across this model, I'd realise we probably didn't really get past others.
Right.
And as I think about the other coaches in that coaching team, I don't think many of the others did as well. So what do you think that meant for myself and those other coaches when we sat around a room to pick a side, to review, to all the performance stuff? What it meant was we weren't able to challenge, ask questions, have open, robust discussion. And what do you reckon it meant for the side? The performance went south. And unfortunately, what it meant for the coach is his job got replaced in the end. My other story is I went and had a crack at senior coaching myself in the local competition here in South Australia. And I took one of my best mates to be an assistant. Not because I thought he'd say yes to everything, but because we were dead set in this space. And I knew that was an important piece. And I remember, I love telling this story. It was in my second year. First year, we'd gone all right. We'd made the finals. The second year, we were going really poorly. And I was under the pump from the CEO and the board. And my mate knew that. We'd just been beaten by nearly 10 goals the day before. And I was walking my kids the next morning feeling sorry for myself and trying to stay away from everyone in the rest of the world because the kids were the only ones who didn't get the footy stuff. So they were good company at that stage. Anyway, my phone rings. It was my mate, and he rings and we have a chat. And then he comes out with a question, what the hell was going on with you in the coach's box yesterday? Now, any of your viewers who've watched AFL footy will know that sometimes coaches get a bit carried away in the box, etc. Bit animated, thank you. I played dumb and said, what do you mean? And he was kind enough then to go on and tell me that I was acting like a you-know-what in the box. So I just got off the phone and that was able to add to my woes. I just was already feeling bad enough and I got off the phone. And I often ask people, how do you reckon I felt towards my mate after that call? And some people say really annoyed with him and some say you were thankful. And the answer lies in this pyramid, Graham. And the answer was that I felt I'll tell you what happened. My first thought went to, why did he bother to do that on a Sunday morning? I didn't ring him and say, what did you think of my behavior in the box yesterday? He rang me out of the blue after a big loss, knowing I'm under the pump already from the board and the CEO, and he rang me to tell me that. And I asked the question to myself, why would he do it? And I could only come up with two reasons. And one was because I reckon he cares about me, and the second was because he wants me to get better.
He's trying to help you.
But the only reason I thought that, if we go back to this model, is because we have that relationship. So and we sit there on the pyramid. Yeah.
So this leads perfectly to that old thing. And, I often question why certain senior leaders will bring, trusted lieutenants with them. And you often see, some people look at it as hedonistic, where a leader will bring an old mate in and next thing, they've got these little empire building kind of stuff that goes on, particularly inside corporations. But quite often, if you think about it in terms of your model, it's because there is already with that, the better the devil there is already that genuine conversation that you can have.
Yeah, absolutely. But I've seen plenty of examples where it's the other. So again, I'm almost leading us down a path that couldn't go the other way, that people have just brought them in because they're yes men and we know they're not going to argue with me and they're on my side.
Right.
The beauty, my point here is no one else in that organisation knew me well enough to be able to ring me and do that.
Yeah.
And this is where this is a bit of a myth. Oh, we're good friends, so we can't have that conversation. No. We disagree with that. We say if you're really, truly good friends, that's the conversation you can have. You think about a marriage, you think about the closest of relationships. They have to be able to have those genuine conversations. Now, I'd love to say that I was able to turn that season around and win the premiership. I can't say that. In fact, I lost my job at the end of the year. But I can tell you, as a result of his feedback, that I changed my behaviour in the coach's box.
You learned from it.
I laminated a little sign with some key words for me because I was able to delude myself to say that my behaviour wasn't impacting on the coaches in that box, or more importantly, the players out in the field. Well, he was there to tell me, yeah, it is. It is impacting us. And I'm forever grateful for that. But without the relationship we have, without a framework we have, because we would have had a framework as a coaching group, he's got nothing to base the conversation on.
And to your model here, the key words on the side there, safe and risk. He was taking a risk in your friendship, in confronting you. That must have been difficult for him too.
100%. But that's the point.
Yeah.
I always ask groups, what do you think his options were? Because there's a number of options. One, of course, is to say nothing.
Yeah.
Another is to bitch about behind my back to the other coaches. Worst case, people joke about is he could try and take your job. So, yeah, I was confident he wasn't going to do that. I reckon the worst one, though, that I reckon we're all guilty of is the woe is me. Ring me and say, you poor thing, I know you're under the pump. I know the CEO's got you. What is he doing there? He's just saying, Daniel, keep behaving like that. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yet he knows it's not okay.
Yep.
And that's the misery loves company bit that I reckon happens. Oh yeah, it's not fair, is it? Oh, you poor thing. When really, what we don't condone that behavior. We don't want them to, but we just don't feel comfortable enough to have the conversation.
Which to me, in my limited way of thinking, and this model's new to me, so I'm still getting my head around it too. But you talked in the second interview about artificial harmony. If you're up there in the others, the stuff and the grunt, then that's where you're in that world, which most sales teams are in, of artificial harmony. People don't really know how to have that tough conversation. They feel reluctant to go to the boss and say, hey, listen, boss, please stop making me cold call. We think there's a better way. They just are forced into their little pigeonhole and told what to do.
Yeah. And I know we talked about it, but I don't think I brought it up, did I, last time?
No.
But here's the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
And this is a Stephen Covey one, but you're absolutely right. At one end, this idea that, it's easier just to toe the party line. So at the other end is mean-spirited attacks. Obviously, that's the real toxic bit.
Yep.
Again, the special bit is in the middle with these genuine conversations, with this trust and respect. And
yeah.
quite often companies could have been here, and in trying to clean it up, they go to a point where it's down here and no one wants to tread on anyone's toes, etc. We just want to grow it to here. Yeah. And when I ask people, where are you on this line? Some will say, we get in here a bit, but we're generally here.
I love it.
And it's unfortunately, you'll have some people watching this saying, yeah, I'd love to, but my leader, in the end, the leader will be the driver of this, of course.
So Daniel, this is all great stuff, and it's miles ahead of anything that I've seen in my career, and I'm intending to implement as much of it as I can in my own business. And I guess my question is to the listeners and the people who've watched, interviews 1 and 2 as well. Fantastic theory, fantastic models and frameworks, a lot to absorb and digest. What would you say to somebody, in a sales leadership position or a company owner position, someone that's trying to get better performance out of their team? Where do they start with this stuff? Apart from reaching out to leading teams and calling you guys in, what else should they do?
Well, that's a fairly sensible start. I would have thought that one, but no, all jokes aside, and perhaps we can stop sharing that now because we're obviously a lot better looking than that model. Where would they start? You said it beautifully. I love that your intro, and I love the fact that wasn't set up, that you said, well, we use it. We talk about our purpose now, and it's a driver for every conversation. If they don't have a live document that talks about a purpose, if they do dig it up, but see is it still real, and again, test its stickiness, if you like, with the people. Because if they don't worry whether you believe in that purpose or not, do your folk believe it? Does it resonate with them? And if it doesn't mean you have to change it if it doesn't, but you somehow, by having conversations, by asking them what I think it means, getting them to buy into it, because then you can have the conversation you said about, well, here's our purpose. So there's your starting point. And the key bit again is to either again dust off a values document or start with this idea of how do we want this world to look? How do we want our world to look? Even if it's a smaller bit, is coming out of COVID, what do we want financial year 2021 to look like? Now, yes, you'll go to the mechanics of COVID. Yeah, that's great. No. But how are we going to do it?
Yep.
So if we think of the purpose as the why, the mechanics is the what, the dynamics is the how.
Yes. That's the key part that's mostly missing, I think, for me.
So what are we going to do? We're going to drive 2 million in revenues. Excellent. How? What are the behaviors that we're going to reward and accept? And then you'll get down to the minutiae of we're going to make 10 calls a day or whatever, the mechanics of it. But what are the behaviors? We're going to go the extra yard. We're going to put there'll be some key behaviors. But then, of course, dangerous doing that if you ain't going to come back to it. If you ain't going to reward and have conversations. Did a session with a group the other day, and I said, how are you keeping this document alive? And they said, we do regular toots or shout outs or ring the bell. And that just looks like someone acknowledging, Graham, love what you did the other day. Thank you. And you refer to the values. You refer to the behaviors. You don't just say you did a good job. You refer to them.
Which reinforces the behaviors and helps keep people or drive that momentum. It's interesting in our own business, Daniel, since the first conversation about this, you and I went back to my team and I said, guys, let's revisit our common purpose and let's all agree. And we had what I thought would be a 20-minute conversation turned into about a 2-hour conversation. And everyone came away from that once we got, our little statement, our little tagline. And I can share that with you. Our common purpose is to help salespeople protect and upgrade their careers. Really simple, really short. And everyone in the business here became really engaged all of a sudden about, okay, well, I'm doing this thing over here and I've got this task to do as well, but actually this one doesn't help protect and upgrade people's careers. So it really did put a lens over things that enabled us to make some pretty quick decisions about what the priorities were.
So Graham, if you asked for the ongoing, what could people come out of the tangible thing, if they did nothing more than what you just said then, and every Friday or every Monday, they just asked the group, what have you done this week to help live our purpose?
Yep.
Then you're on a winner. I mean, the other piece out of today's session that I'd love them to do is think about that. And if they've got this, they can look back and take a screenshot of that pyramid. If they've got that pyramid, plot your team, and pick one or two people that the relationship needs to get better. Not just so we feel better about ourselves, but again, coming back to performance, that one and that one. So it won't necessarily be the ones that are the highest. Could be some up there that, well, I actually don't have a lot of interaction. And to be honest, that's not pivotal to the success of our team. But this one here, that's my 2 IC, and we ain't where we should be right now. I'm going to work on that piece. And that they're the tangible things. And we love with that pyramid when people plot their team. Of course, when we're working with a team, we get them to plot it, and then they've got to go and have the conversations one-on-one to say, I've got you here, Graham, where did you have me? Now, that's a challenging exercise, right? But at least with people watching it, plot them, and then hang on to that sheet. And in 6 months' time, come back, how did I go? Where did I move them to?
I love it. I'm going to go the next step. I'm going to use that the funnel or the pyramid, the upside down pyramid, and plot my customer relationships on there.
Sorry, that's the other one. Yeah. We've challenged ourselves at Leading Teams to be the most important business partner with our clients. It'll sit there again. And again, I talked about that one where a colleague had someone ring and tell him about his mental health challenges. I reckon that's a tick. I've been invited along to birthday anniversaries of businesses, of engagement parties, of leaders, of individuals that would suggest that we're a fair way down. But not in all of the cases. And especially when you're in a sales environment, the ones that will drop off quickest are the ones that where it's easiest to do. Yeah.
Safe. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mate, there's so much in this, and I could talk for hours about it, and I'm sure you and I will get together over a beer at some stage and have a bit more of a chat. But I think what I'll do, if you don't mind, is once I post this next video out to our followers on LinkedIn and we get the normal amount of feedback that we've had on the first two, I might use that to try and dictate what we do with the next one if we do a next one. And we'll let the viewers kind of give us their thoughts on what they'd like us to talk about next, if you're up for that.
That's a great idea. And if there ain't much on offer, then we don't need to keep chatting. But if people are interested in asking questions, we'd love to hear 5 or 10 questions thrown at us, and we can get through them easy. That'd be great.
Well, let's do that. I'll publish on LinkedIn shortly, and obviously you will as well. And we'll see what comes back. And if there's some more topics that people want us to cover, then let's do it.
Beautiful. Excellent, mate. Really enjoyed it again.
As always, thanks, buddy. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.